technology have demonstrated that some areas of forensic science have great additional potential to help law enforcement identify criminals. Many crimes that may have gone unsolved are now solved because forensic science is helping to identify the perpetrators. Paragraph. These advances, however, have also revealed that in some cases, substantive information and testimony based on faulty forensic science analysis may have contributed to the wrongful conviction of innocent people. This fact has demonstrated the potential danger of giving undue weight to evidence and testimony derived from imperfect testing and analysis. Moreover, imprecise or exaggerated expert testimony has sometimes contributed to the admission of erroneous or misleading evidence. And so going on page 8, what the report suggests is, again, quote, these disparities between and within the forensic science disciplines highlight a major problem in the forensic science community. The simple reality is that the interpretation of forensics evidence is not always based upon scientific studies to determine its validity. This is a serious problem. Although research has been done in some disciplines, there is a notable dearth of peer-reviewed published studies establishing the scientific bases and validity of many forensics methods. And so what the article takes up and what the Academy takes up is really this kind of sense of where do we stand in terms of these kind of evidence, again, largely excluding DNA, and what kind of reforms are needed in criminal justice to try to raise the bar in terms of these other kind of forensic science areas. I want to focus upon issues in terms of some of the specific problems in specific areas, but I want to broaden things a bit more in terms of what I see as the two major kind of issues that are highlighted by the report. First, the kind of gulf that exists in many ways between how the realms of science and criminal justice operate in their pursuit of truth. And I think largely what has gotten us to this particular point in time is a sense in which the science community, advocated by the National Academy, has said it's time to bring up to speed, under scientific standards, much of what has taken place somewhat sloppily in practice in terms of forensic science. Much of what police departments, prosecutors, the courts have allowed to take place, we now need to try and correct and address those kind of issues. And, again, kind of the second part of that related is, again, an attempt to kind of bring part of the criminal justice system into the mainstream of the kind of information-based society with related implications in terms of the role of technology, credentialed expertise, and education that we find today. And again, I think in that sense, DNA has really provided the historical kind of factor which has brought that about. If we hadn't had DNA, there probably would be less call or less need for those kind of issues, simply because we'd be in more of a state of ignorance of not knowing how accurate or how good the quality of the other evidence was in that sense. So let me focus on that first point analytically and give you a sense of some of the kind of difficulties or problems between these two worlds, the worlds of criminal justice and the operation of forensic science, and the realm of science in a more academic or traditional kind of sense in that regard. First of all, in terms of the concern with knowledge, generally I think we think of science as concerned with finding knowledge in an attempt to offer some kind of general principle or some broad understanding about what's taking place in the world, to develop theoretical understanding, to provide broad-based explanations for what's taking place in the natural world, what's taking place in terms of social conduct. Criminal justice, on the other hand, is more concerned with finding knowledge about a specific set of facts and circumstances involving human conduct. What happened in this particular situation? Is this person who we have now apprehended responsible for committing these kind of acts or not? And so the goals of science and the goals of criminal justice are kind of opposed or operate very differently in those kind of situations. Means for developing knowledge, science attempts to test theories, models for their truth value based upon the use of generally agreed upon standards and procedures for study and research. We operate in terms of a sense in which the rules and procedures differ somewhat discipline to discipline. We have a basic understanding of what you set up as a hypothesis, the ground rules in terms of statistics you might use to evaluate that evidence, what are the conditions of a valid, reliable study, what are the conditions that do not provide reliability or raise threats about those kind of issues. Criminal justice, however, through forensics, relies upon developing and utilizing skills and judgments based upon experience and technologies that vary and seem to fit the nature of the material evidence available in a specific case. And I think the best kind of analogy I can think of in that regard is, in many ways, forensics is much closer to what we might think of, and they're kind of vanishing today, but as a trade rather than a science or rather than a full discipline. That is, it largely operates on a system of apprenticeship by which the young apprentice learns from the expert how to do fingerprint analysis, how to do blood spatter analysis, how to carry out certain kind of investigations related to piecing the evidence together in those kind of cases. And the problems related to those kind of issues obviously are, and again, in terms of where we are today, think of the practice of carpentry. Okay? Carpenters all operate a little bit differently. They're all going to use their own kind of approach and technique to how they construct or build the kind of base in terms of a frame for a house in that kind of regard. On the other hand, all carpenters have to abide by zoning regulations, regulations related to housing codes, and regulations, and in some ways if we go from carpentry to electricians and plumbers, maybe in a better sense, what is appropriate or what is seen as kind of the standard in terms of where electricity should be, how far outlets should be apart from each other, how far the studs should be from each other, those kind of regulations in that sense. In forensics, we don't have those standards. We don't have those kind of shared rules. What we have are the kind of particular expertise or presumed expertise of individual persons who will testify or will state, yes, there's a match here, or yes, there's a significant relationship that exists between this particular evidence and this accused person in this kind of case. And so a large part of what the Academy calls for is standardization, is some sense of establishing some kind of rules by which, in a similar regard to science, we can rely upon some kind of agreements in terms of these kind of issues. The means of evaluating and establishing knowledge, science relies upon the community of scientists and the use of replication involving multiple researchers, multiple investigations, multiple audiences of peers over time to sift through error, bias, false data to establish validated findings and conclusions. Science basically believes that over the course of time, error will eventually fall away and we'll get closer and closer to truth. And that error may be accidental, it may be error in terms of poor quality of measurement, it may be falsification related to data, it may be both intentional and unintentional errors that take place in that kind of regard. Criminal justice, on the other hand, relies upon a relatively small group of individuals, the judge and or jury members, to determine the truth value of findings and conclusions related to criminal legal events. So we have to make some kind of decision in the relatively short term within the process of this particular crime, this particular criminal trial, about the evidence that we have before us and where it fits in terms of that kind of truth value. Again, science operates on the assumption that knowledge emerges and develops more fully in the process of scientific investigation and research over time, often years, decades, or longer. Criminal justice, in contrast, deals with the brute reality that knowledge and truth with respect to guilt or innocence of an accused person must be determined relatively quickly by the end of the criminal trial process. We have to reach some kind of judgment about truth. Is this accused person guilty or innocent of these particular charges? And that's where the ultimate knowledge and truth needs to rest in those particular situations. Next, the role of participants in the knowledge creation process. Science operates in a generally collaborative process whereby individual scientists are encouraged over the long run to share information in the belief that a public and ongoing collegial process will lead to better quality knowledge more quickly. Peer-reviewed journals, presentations in terms of public conferences, so that error can be found, so that disagreement can take place within the scientific community, and again, based upon the fact that eventually truth will emerge out of those circumstances. Criminal justice, in our system, however, operates on the basis of an adversarial process, where truth, or knowledge, is thought to emerge most appropriately from the combat of advocates, each acting in their own side's best interest in making their strongest case that they can for one particular point of view, their theory of the case and the criminal incident. This conflict-based adversarial process is seen as the best way to get to the truth in a criminal matter. Let the two sides slug it out and let some kind of impartial judge or jury weigh the evidence and decide what's true under those kind of circumstances. So again, a very different kind of model of how we decide what is true or what is knowledge in those two kind of circumstances. What the National Academy of Sciences reports turns to then are a range of problems, specific problems related to the fit in these areas between, again, the kind of prevailing scientific paradigm and how is it forensics do or do not measure up to those issues. The first and a major problem that they cite throughout the report is the problem of fragmentation. And again, that goes back to the fact that we have these multiple disciplines or multiple fields involved in terms of what we think of forensics today. Quoting from the Commission, the term forensic science